afternoon. My name is Sarah Nielsen. I'm the Executive Director of the Simsbury Main Street Partnership, and I'm very pleased to have with me a couple of guests that are going to speak on the Simsbury Veterans Memorial. I have with me Raymond Jennings, I have John Fox, and I have Terri-Ann Hahn, and we'll get into a little bit about why these three guests are here with me today. But I wanted to start off with a little bit of a backstory. The American Legion, post 84, and the Veterans of Foreign Wars, post 1926, have joined together to create this new memorial. And I'll let you guys talk a little bit about the symbolism, but tell me first about these two amazing organizations for those of us that aren't as familiar with the veterans groups in town.
Well, one of the things that I find very nice about the two organizations is that they are very cooperative. There isn't anything that we do that we don't do together. And so this has been a joy working together with another veterans organization in town to accomplish this very worthwhile goal.
Perfect. John, can you add to that a little bit?
Well, I think most often we get questions about the distinction between the two organizations because they do have the same goal, which is to help veterans, to aid veterans. And that is the basic goal of both organizations, and the bylaws are very similar. The difference between the two is that for the Veterans of Foreign War, which is a smaller organization, is that you have had to serve in conflict or in theater of conflict, whereas the American Legion, you serve, there are periods of time that are designated that a veteran has served in the military, that he can be a member of the American Legion. So that's the distinction between the two organizations.
But as you mentioned, you both work together, both organizations are very close, have done a lot of joint ventures to help our veterans, the causes,
Yes.
educate the public. And I'm going to get to Terri-Ann very shortly because we have some really interesting discussions to talk about and show people what this memorial will look like. I think that people, residents from all over have been talking about what is it going to be? It's going to be in my downtown. What's it going to look like? How did it happen? But you went through an extensive, I should say a fairly extensive process first to do the design. I should mention that this started as the veterans do have a memorial that's at Eno Memorial Hall currently. And I know Main Street had been happy to assist with the flagpole, and we've done some benches, and that really is a beautiful memorial. Tell us what prompted you to do this bigger enterprise.
Well, Sarah, there are really three memorials in town. There is the one in front of Eno, and that memorializes those people since the Civil War, really, mostly World War I and subsequent events. But across the street in the Center Cemetery, there's a memorial for the Revolutionary War veterans, and down in the Weetog section of town, there's a memorial for the Civil War veterans. But with the passing of Sergeant Felix Del Greco, there is no more room on the memorial in front of Eno. And so Bruce Elliott, who's the commander of the American Legion post, and Len Lanza, who is a past commander of the VFW post, embarked on an effort to make it right, to have one memorial for all of the 104 veterans who gave their lives as residents of Simsbury, and for those of the rest of us to have a mechanism to remember ourselves or remember a family member or a relative, and to have one visible memorial in town that people can recognize as something that honors our military service.
I think that's a really important point. That's such a fantastic point that when we're thinking of our veterans, to remember that you guys are giving the highest level of service to the community and really honoring those that have given their life in service of their community, residents of Simsbury. And that's incredibly important to the community, to the businesses, to the town, to the fabric of what makes us Simsbury. So talk a little bit about, you went through this extensive design process with Landscape Architectural Design Associates, or LADA PC. I'm going to refer to them as LADA from now on, with Terri-Ann Hahn. And Terri-Ann, you have been such a wonderful representative of the community. You've helped with so many projects throughout town, including and most notably, recently notable, the gateway signs to Simsbury and Main Street. Thanks you for that. So these gentlemen approached you and said, please donate donate your design services to us. And you probably thought it wouldn't be as in-depth as it was going to be, or as long as it was going to be. Tell us a little bit about...
Well, about 2.5 years ago, plus or minus, we were approached regarding a Veterans Memorial, because I had, when I was first in school for landscape architecture, I designed the Granby Veterans Memorial just up the street. And so there was I find memorials to be sort of a fascinating element of what it is that we do for design services. And we said, oh, we'd be interested. But after, I think, unfortunately, we all as a group thought that it would go a little bit smoother than it did. And because one of the things that's most difficult about memorials is that everybody has an opinion. Absolutely. They're always right, and so whatever you design and wherever you're going to do it, somebody is going to think that this is a bad idea. And unfortunately, we did run into that a couple of different times, and so we had a number of different sites. We had radically different ideas of what the memorial was. But ultimately, the veterans all decided that it needed to be part of the community, that it wanted to be someplace that was readily available to all residents, that it was visually readily available. And although there are 3 separate memorials, they're not necessarily visually accessible. You would think that the Civil War Memorial was quite noticeable because it's nice and tall in Weetog, but it's set back and it's not exactly on a pedestrian walkway. So putting something that had a little bit more substance, the establishment of a place on Hot Meadow Street became kind of one of the critical elements of the design. So we looked for a long time for various different sites, considered a lot of different options, talked to a lot of different people. I think I was up to option 16, I think. Which makes it a fascinating thing to try and come up with something good every single time that you start the design over again. But I think we settled on something that was really has some meaning on multiple levels, that really shows the respect that Simsbury has for their veterans, and is something that people can be proud of for the next several hundred years.
Well, that's fantastic. Again, the veterans are, and we'll talk about this in a little more depth, but our veterans are our neighbors, they're our business owners, they're men and women throughout our community that are still serving the community, still active and engaged. And I think that's so critical to have a spot that is visible. And we talked about, let's actually define the location for those of them that don't understand where this is. You're directly on Hot Meadow Street now.
Right. If you pull up slide number 1, we're located on Hot Meadow Street. Across the street from us is Drake Hill Mall. We're right on the corner of the driveway, which goes into the library, which is known as Eaglewood Drive. Mm-hmm. And we're going to be located as you're facing the library on the left-hand side of that corner. So it'll be visible from both directions, north and south on Hot Meadow Street. And we're taking up that space just off the sidewalk. It is currently a little bit of a hill and some woods, but some trees will be taken down, nothing significant, and some fill placed so they'll be up at the level of the Hot Meadow Street. Mm-hmm. And if you go to slide number 2, that is just a close-up of a site plan showing that particular design.
So again, you have a very prominent spot in downtown. You're across from Fitzgerald's and Drake Hill Mall, as you mentioned. You're just south of the library on Hot Meadow Street, a little bit north of the First Church. Parking. When people want to pay their respects, their first question is going to be, where do I park?
Right. There are 2 possible locations to park, which is the library parking lot and also the path that comes from the new parking that the town put in next to Boy Scout Hall. So, and it's handicap accessible from either direction, there's easy access and multiple parking spaces from both sides.
Perfect. Let's talk about the design, because you mentioned that there were about 16 iterations of design, but I think it's fair to say that both veterans groups are solidly behind the design that is currently planned. You feel that there's meaning and that this is a reflective place where you guys can come and pay respects to past veterans and also remember your own service. Tell us a little bit about the design, and I'll go to Terri, but John, walk me through a little bit about.
Yeah, so one of the key elements, Ray mentioned the element of honoring the 104 who have died in service. But another key element of the design that makes it differentiates it from the rest of the memorials in town is it also honors those who have served. The base, there are two different shall we say, elements of the design. The first is the granite pillars. There are 4 granite pillars, as you can see by the sign behind me. There are 4 granite pillars, white granite, with black granite inserts, and the inserts will have the names of the 104 who died. The base of the design is made up of bricks, or pavers as they're called, but they're actually bricks, and they can be inscribed with veterans' names. So it gives a chance for those who want to honor a veteran and family who served. Then that can be done as a donation, but it also serves to, in general, honor those who served. So it's not just to honor the 104, although we do need as a town to honor those who have died in service, but also honor those who have served.
And unfortunately, with the realities of the world as it is today, it also leaves some room where we hope we would never have to add another name, but it does leave room for the eventuality if the town does have to add another name.
Absolutely. That is, as Ray mentioned, that is a critical, one of the critical motivators for us to be engaged in this project was that the Eno Hall Memorial had to be modified in order to even fit Felix's, Sergeant Del Greco's name on there. So, and so it creates passion in us that, it's not the proper way to honor those who have given the ultimate, given their life in service.
Agreed. And Terri-Ann, walk us through a little bit. So we mentioned that you have these beautiful 4 granite pillars. Mm-hmm. Set the scene.
Sure.
You talked about the brick pavers as well, but there's still some other elements that I think are unique.
If you look at slide number 3, it shows the overall design. The first thing that you're going to see, of course, is as you come onto the plaza, is the American flag. That's a critical part. It is sort of the focal point for the viewer that's going by, especially whizzing by at however many miles an hour we drive
slowly.
down Home Street. But
my Main Street hat reminds you be slow.
That's right. The idea is that the American flag reminds you of where you're at. Your eye comes down into the plaza, and there are 4 granite pillars. Those 4 granite pillars have. You can walk around them. So the front has those aspects that are related to the memorial. The back reflects those elements of the sort of keys of democracy, carved out, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and then those visual elements or icons that we represent with liberty and what come to represent America across the world. Lady Liberty, the Liberty Bell. There's someone that's talking about the Connecticut Charter Oak as well. But those aspects that sort of make sense to people. The front, though, is what focuses on the plaza itself into the creation of the sense of an overall space. Pillar number 1, if you go to slide number 4, it's kind of a close-up of those aspects. The first pillar, the one closest to the Hot Meadow Street, has the phrase, some gave all, all gave some, and some gave all, to remind us as to who the names that are on the pillars are about. It's really those names for residents who gave their lives. And it has a series of inscribed faces that represent soldiers over time, because a lot of times those names become somewhat impersonal, and we wanted to make sure that people understood that this was about people, both those who gave their lives, but the families who also continued to sacrifice after that occurred, for those who were in active service, both the servicemen and the families, and the town as a whole, who sort of, it's all a support system that you need. So then the second and third pillars have the names, and those are the panels face the plaza, but also have side aspects for that sort of reality of potential expansion. And then the fourth pillar, which is the one furthest away from Hop Meadow Street, has a carved, draped American flag over the top of it, and has just a notation indicating honoring those residents of Simsbury who gave their lives for the country, and the date of the memorial, which would be, at this point, 2015. I think originally they said 2010 on them, but time goes by. In addition, the columns will be lit so that it also sort of brings your eye to the attention to that, but also from a security perspective. And there are a series of benches that are granite benches that will be located on the plaza that represent the various different service.
There's 5 benches for the 4 armed services and the Merchant Marines, correct?
It's 6
Correct.
benches.
Oh,
5 branches.
Yes, sorry,
Yes.
6 benches for the 5 armed services and the Merchant Marines.
Correct.
Yep.
Okay. So, and then again, I want to talk about, because part of this is to educate and to get our residents excited about the memorial, and also remind them about not just the sacrifice of the veterans that have served. You know, we've interviewed and we've talked to a lot of World War II veterans and what have you, but you know, there are veterans that are there are people in our community that are currently serving or that have recently served. Talk to me about, you mentioned John, but let's talk a little more in depth about how people can become engaged. First and foremost, we want their money, Ray. You're the chairman of the fund, right? So what you're in the process of doing, both veterans organizations, you're in the process of fundraising for this memorial to make it a reality.
Before we run out of time, let me talk about money.
That's
We need to raise $175,000 to make this thing happen. We've divided our effort into several phases. The first phase was for the American Legion and the VFW combined to kick off the campaign with $35,000. The next thing we did was we sent letters out to the 860-odd veterans who live in town, and that's a number that a lot of people didn't know about until a few years ago. And they've all received a letter, and the Paver applications have been coming in. We've also received some donations from people who have known about the project and want to support it, but don't have any veteran connections. The next thing we did was we prepared a letter to send out to the 300-odd small businesses in town, and those letters have gone out. And I don't know, John, I think maybe 1 or 2 responses, that's pretty new, but 1 or 2 responses have come in, and
Yes,
but we expect others.
Yeah, we have gotten 1 or 2, but largely those have come from people actually going physically to the person and asking for a donation.
okay.
The next phase, which we're about to embark on, is going to the larger corporations. And then one of the things we're wrestling with is how we get to the people in town who don't have a military background, who don't have a relative that's in the military and don't have much of a connection with the military. So we're wrestling with how we do that. But one of the things, and I think John would do well to talk about it, is that we have a campaign, a media campaign going in local media with respect to trying to attract the interest of those people who don't have a connection, but we want them to understand that when somebody is serving, that there are families back home.
And I should mention, it's not even that they don't have a connection. They don't have a direct connection, because I think is the educational campaign that John will talk about really has started to show us is that whether or not you have someone, a family or a friend that is served or is serving, that everybody as a community in Simsbury is connected to veterans issues, to our veterans, and that's really trying to reach out to them, if you wanted to discuss that a little.
Yeah, in the concept, and actually you're the one that came up with the concept, so Sarah is our consultant for our media campaign, and there's a group of 3 of us that are on that media committee, Hatpool, myself, and
Colby Thresher.
Colby Thresher are the other two. This concept was to tell the story of, in a series of three stories to date that will tell the story of that veteran service, but from a family perspective, to educate the public on it's not just the family. I mean, it's not just the person who's serving and the ardor of his service, but also the family. Put in perspective that the family often doesn't know. Rob Olson was the last one that we did. He was a Navy SEAL. He runs a CrossFit facility in downtown Simsbury. And during his service, obviously his wife didn't know where he was. So he would, in general, she knew he was in Afghanistan, but she didn't know exactly what he was doing or how he was doing it. So as a newlywed couple, having a family overseas, or a husband overseas in service, or a wife overseas in service, and the family being back home is really hard on the family. And that story, getting that story out so that people understand the ardor, what the family goes through in that situation is important. So we first did a press release to let everyone know that the memorial had finally been approved by the town. We had a site approved, and we had a design that was approved by the town. So we put that press release out. Then we started on this series of telling stories of the veterans in town and picking 3 examples. The next one will be on Sergeant Felix DeGreco. And that one will be a little bit different than the previous 2, because the reporter in the previous ones only had to talk to one person to get the story. The family member, Dick Wagner, spoke about his father's service, and
Rick Wagner,
talked about
yes.
Dick Wagner's service. So we had that story, and the Wagners being a prominent family in town.
Well, and I think we should mention we chose three different tales to tell, really.
Right.
You talk about Richard Wagner Sr., or Dick Wagner as he was known, who was a World War II veteran, a 2-time prisoner of war, who went back and reinvested to his community with opening a business and donating things like the Wagner Wood. So, I mean, we still have things that are important to us, his contributions. And then, as you mentioned, Rob Olson, who's a recently deployed Navy SEAL, so has seen some really serious conditions through Afghanistan, and the toll that it took not only on Rob, but when he went away, on his wife, on his family. They have a little girl now, and others like him, where when somebody deploys, the family still has to stay behind, and they have to take care of the kids, and they have to do all of those things, and they're down a parent. Or they're in, it's somebody's child, it's somebody's brother or sister, or so the whole dynamic of that community shifts. And then, as you mentioned, Felix, who's such a touching story, because he was a young sergeant, correct, who gave his life, and it's the most recent. So I think that's the most raw to a lot of people, because that's still, you remember that even from a couple of years ago. But as you mentioned, telling it through a community, he was so involved in the community. He was a Boy Scout. And
for Felix's story, we hope that we are going to interview one of the National Guard troops that served with him. We're going to interview members of the family, and we're going to interview his Boy Scout, Rich Guglielmetti, who was his Scoutmaster at the time. And he happened to also be my son's Scoutmaster, because my son and Felix were very good friends, best of friends, actually. So we'll give a perspective of the impact on the community as a whole in this series. So those are, and the message isn't just about the stories of the veterans, but also tie what they feel about the memorial, because I think by telling that story, it will incentivize the community.
Well, and we don't have a lot of time left, but I do think it's really important just to share. A great example is Mr. Mimnaugh. if you
want to tell that story?
if you wanted to
Sure.
just because it gets me all teary, and,
Yeah.
and I know that everybody knows, our John Mimnaw's dad knows John,
Yes.
who's a former police officer, an amazing former police officer, and still in the community. So,
Jack Mimnaugh was a Marine fighter pilot in both World War II and the Korean War. And he made application for a paver and wrote a little note attached to it. And he said that he would appreciate it if some of us could go down there to his home and show him what we're trying to do. He said he didn't think that he would be alive to see this thing through to its conclusion. So John and Hap Poole and I went to give him a full-blown description of what was going on. We were there for 2 hours. The guy's health may not be very good, but his mind is sharp as ever, and he regaled us with stories for 2 hours about his flying. And I thought one of the interesting things was I asked him if he'd ever flown a jet. And he said right at the very end, when I was about to get out, jets came into being, and he flew a jet. And he thought that was really pretty neat.
and he didn't hold it against you that you guys are just Navy guys, right?
Well, you got to remember that the Navy owns the Marines. That's my line.
But I do think, it's
We have the same boss anyway.
Yeah. Let me just summarize by saying this, Sarah. If one goes to the Memorial Day parade and sees 10,000 people lining Route 10, and probably people didn't focus on it, but if you did, you'd notice that the First Company Governor's Foot Guard Band was here 2 years in a row. And I asked one of the guys, why were you here 2 years in a row? There's 168 other towns that are probably demanding your presence. And the guy said, we love to come to Simsbury because of the crowd and the number of veterans who participate.
I will say, I am so honored to be a part of the Simsbury community, and I think it's things like this, it's going to be projects like this where the community comes together. So a reminder to everybody as you're watching the show, you may have those paver applications on your fridge. I know we ran into people that do. Please get them in. There's 2 different sizes. You do not have to be a Simsbury veteran to have your name. You can actually be a veteran from anywhere. And that's
Exactly.
really that part of, active veterans. So, if you want to honor a veteran from anywhere, please donate, buy one of those pavers. Think about donating to the memorial. You can contact Ray Jennings. And just very quick, the website for all of the information is?
It's the name, Simsbury Veterans Memorial, with no spaces, all small letters.com. It's that simple.
Really, you couldn't find a better group of men and women, a more worthy cause, and it's really time for Simsbury to come together, support this. Let's get this done in 2015, okay? Make it a reality. So again, SimsburyVeteransMemorial.com, and you can contact Raymond Jennings. You can contact both the American Legion or the Veterans of Foreign Wars for more information. And thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.